The God Domain. Welcome to the online course about the Deity of Jesus. Lesson 1. A Systematic Theology. Hello and welcome to this video called A Systematic Theology, the first lesson in this online course on the Deity of Jesus. My name's Tim, and in this 15-minute film we'll be covering the following points. 1. Objectors and objections to the Deity of Jesus. Number 2. The intellectual wall and a systematic theology. Number 3. How the Bible works as a single unity of information. So firstly, objections and objectors to the Deity of Jesus. In this brief section, we'll ask the question, on what basis do some people reject the assertion that Jesus claimed to be God? This is often an argument presented by those who belong to the modern-day sectarian groups, or to those who follow Islam, and those humanists who adhere to secular spirituality. Their argument seems to be about whether Jesus actually claimed to be God, and I'll answer this at the very end of this video. Secondly, we'll look at the concepts of the intellectual wall and a systematic theology. That is, how to break that wall by using a systematic approach to the Bible. We'll look at what a systematic theology is and how in principle it works. This will be achieved by explaining how the Bible works in a systematic way, how it is designed to flow as a unified set of information. I'll look at the communication threads that run through it and the topics that appear on those threads. We'll see how those threads run through both parts of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New, and all this will be preparation for Lesson 2, which will be an example of those threads at work. From that basis, in Lesson 3, we'll be able to get started on putting together the theology that the Christ is indeed God in the flesh. Don't forget, you can pause this video at any time and go back if you want to think about a statement made and reflect upon it. Let's get started. Over the last 2 millennia, Christianity has had many opponents and skeptics who have denied that Jesus himself ever claimed to be God. Other modern sectarian groups have asserted, and still argue today, that Jesus' disciples didn't teach that he was deity in the flesh, and that the biblical text does not uphold this stance. Yet the worldwide body of Christians, the Church, has claimed his deity throughout its history. The first question to be asked on this subject, therefore, is this: on what basis do some people reject the claim that Jesus claimed to be God? Well, there are a variety of reasons for this denial. Some people just want Christianity to be untrue and will say anything to enforce that agenda. Others point out that in the first 4 books in the second half of the Bible, the New Testament, those accounts that deal with the life of Jesus, that at no point did Jesus ever publicly stand up and overtly say to the crowds that surrounded him, "Hi everyone, guess what? I am God." That blatant, public assertion to be deity, they claim, is not there. This last statement seems to be the main reason why the disagreement exists between Christians and those dissenting voices, and why they are in conflict with each other. One side says, Jesus is deity in the flesh and the Bible clearly tells us so, whilst the other side says, you just believe this by faith as Jesus didn't claim to be God. This disagreement seems to be an unscalable wall by which neither side ever agree, and neither side seem to be able to break through this wall of intellectual conflict to rescue the other from their error of thinking. For the Church, breaking through this wall is quite a challenge. As impossible as it seems, however, it is doable, although it is a task that needs to be tackled very carefully. So as we begin to think about breaching this wall of opposition, how are we initially to consider our approach to its solution? One answer is to put together a systematic theology that is thorough, deep, intricately fine-detailed, and at the same time logically easy to follow, so that it clearly demonstrates that the Bible in general and Jesus himself both witness that his identity is deity incarnate. Logic is a very hard pill to swallow when someone is presenting to you an argument that disagrees with your thinking, but it is often the tool in the modern world that will move people into a place of faith. This was, of course, the route that God took with C.S. Lewis, the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, and in particular, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Lewis was an atheist, and it was the slow encroachment of logic by the arguments of J.R.R. Tolkien and his friend Owen Barfield which brought Lewis to a place where he had to admit there was a God. Then it took Lewis 2 further years for him to move from that position to accepting that Jesus Christ is God. So what kind of mental approach can we put together as we seek to get similar results? What is this systematic theology that this online course is going to be presenting to you? Well, when you look at the Bible, you'll see that it's written in a very specific way. It has 4 threads of communication running through it. Those threads are law, narrative, commentary, poetry. All of these work together to form a single coherent message on the multiple topics that appear across the pages of the 66 books which make up the Bible. It is only when we learn what these threads are and how they work together that we can come up with a systematic theology on any subject that we face, including the subject of the deity of Jesus. So let me briefly unpack for you what those threads of law, narrative, commentary and poetry are. Then I'll give a very brief example of how it works, but the best examples of this will be this course itself, which will continually pull on these threads in order to weave a coherent theological yarn into a material that's fit for use. So first of all, law. The Bible is full of covenantal law. The law represents the mind of God to a fallen humanity who has lost touch with the divine. The law is a place of instruction on God's person, God's character, his place, his position in life, in human history, and his expectations of humanity. It contains his judgments on what is good and right and true, and how God has prepared a way for us to approach him and enter into a spiritual connection with him. Second, we have narrative. The narrative is the ongoing story of humanity, often called salvation history, where we can read about the lives of human beings whom God has called to know him. The Bible takes us through their personal history and also that of the nation of Israel, as God gave them the responsibility, as his treasured possession, to know him and to represent him to the rest of the world. Third, commentary. This is the voice of the prophets whom God raised up to be his mouthpieces. Their job was to reveal the mind of God to those whom he had called. Through them came affirmation and rebuke, praise and correction, reward and judgment. They were men who carried the joys and more often the pains of God in their hearts as they admonished and called a straying people from the errors of their ways. Their commentary was often based upon both the law and the narrative which had already been written. They pulled on these witnesses and brought the mind of God to the current generation to call them to be faithful to God based upon that which God had already said and done. Fourth, poetry. This part of the Bible is revelation of the human heart, its joys, its struggles to walk with God by faith in a fallen world. It is revelation of humanity's desires, fallibility and fallenness, as well as demonstrating the route by which a lost humanity can call upon God in the time of their need and be found by their Creator. It contains prayers, questions, wisdom sayings and overt attitudes, sometimes of anger, sometimes of despair, often of love. All of these are scattered through 4 volumes of work called the Bible's poetry books. The Bible is designed so that all 4 of these threads, law, narrative, commentary and poetry, work together. Within these threads are themes which surface again and again across the books, and it is as these themes appear and reappear that we can view them within different contexts, each context giving us that little bit more information about the truth of what that particular theme means. The Bible repeats this method of communication in both of its parts, the Old Testament, and in the second part, the New Testament. So in both parts of the Bible, the Old and the New, it has the same formula: the law of Moses and the law of Christ. Moses delivers the law from Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus and from the plains next to the Jordan in the book of Deuteronomy. So too, Jesus delivers the law of Christ on the Sermon on the Mount in the account of his life written by Matthew, and continues to unfold the law of Christ in his Sermon on the Plain in Luke's account. Both Moses and Jesus deliver God's mind about who he is, his expectations of us, and how we should live from a mountain and on a plain level place. Then we have the narrative. In the Old Testament, the lives of the children of Israel, and in the New Testament, the life of the early disciples and the early church, starting with Peter and the apostles and ending with the missionary journeys of Paul. Then we have the commentaries. In the Old Testament, the prophets, and in the New Testament, the apostolic letters to the churches written by Paul, James, Peter, John, and Jude. These are also complemented by an apostolic letter from Jesus himself, which he gives to John, which John passes on to the 7 churches as the last book in the Bible, called the Book of Revelation. Finally, poetry. The New Testament has small clips of quotes, songs, and wisdom statements scattered across the commentary letters. It's not a major part of the letters, but they are there and play their part in the corporate witness of God's mind to his church. As many of you will know, this process by which themes and topics are introduced, visited and revisited is also clarified by the fact that the Old Testament foretells the coming of the Christ and the New Testament witnesses about how the Christ has fulfilled that foretelling. So the Old points to the New and the New reflects back on the Old. Together, these two movements of revelation from God form a coherent witness as to what the truth is, so that we can read it with a sound mind and be confident that we've gained a proper and thorough understanding of the subject. In order to illustrate how this works, in the next lesson I'll give you a quick demonstration, not on the deity of Jesus, but on something else. I've chosen a very pictorial topic, as this helps illustrate more easily all that I need to communicate. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I'm going to answer that question that we asked right at the start. Why didn't Jesus overtly say, "I am God"? I think that most Christians would be able to easily provide a response to that question. There were 2 things that Jesus needed to keep a secret during his time with us. The fact that he was the Christ, the fact that he was deity incarnate. If he had said that he was the Christ, then those who followed him would have gone to war with the Roman Empire, seeking to remove the Roman armies out from the boundaries of the land of Israel, because this was their concept of the Messiah. Secondly, if Jesus had said, "I am God," then his fellow countrymen would have tried to stone him for blasphemy. In fact, we see in the Bible that on 3 separate occasions there were attempts on his life. So Jesus had to approach the subject in a very different way. Once we've gone through this course, we'll see that Jesus claimed to be God left, right and centre. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in lesson 2. You've watched lesson 1, a systematic theology, taken from the online course about the deity of Jesus.